Going on, everyone? Back again, the 415ers podcast live 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the Odyssey Podcast Network in cooperation with 95.7 The Game. I am Evan Giddings. That is Marc Grandy. Download, rate, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you don't give us 5 stars, Marc will come to your house and make you give us 5 stars. Marc, what's up, dude?
How's it going, Evan? Happy to be with you guys once again.
Yeah, we're hanging out and getting ready for the weekend, a big weekend for the 49ers as Jimmy Garoppolo is back in the saddle. We thought the Jimmy G era was over. It has been rekindled to some extent, of course, with the loss of Trey Lance, a broken ankle. He had surgery on Monday for that ankle. Despite some swirling reports going around earlier this week, Kyle Shanahan confirmed this week that Trey Lance will be done for the entirety of the season, expecting a return at the beginning of 2023. But it is officially back on again for Jimmy Garoppolo. He will be under center this weekend on Sunday night at Mile High against the Denver Broncos. First things first, Marc, does that make you feel, I don't know, maybe a little more comfortable?
Comfortable, like as a Niner fan with Jimmy Garoppolo as my quarterback. I'm definitely. I think I have a better idea of what to expect going into the game. I know Niner fans, and I think myself included, were going into the season with kind of a new sense of energy and just generally speaking excitement for the season because of the unknown with Trey Lance. But as we've talked about, I think specifically last episode, Evan, how this kind of changes expectations. It changes the range of outcomes based on who is playing quarterback. Um, you're more confident that your team isn't going to get blown out any single game or isn't going to lose to a really bad team, but you're less confident that this team is going to have some, high points that were possible maybe with Trey Lance as the quarterback. So I would say less excited, less I don't know, eager to see what this team looks like, only because I feel like I have a pretty good idea because they've looked this way for 3, 4, 5 years now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to put it. There's less excitement in the air for Niners fans, but there's the feeling of familiarity, which, of course, is where we want to start this episode with on the 415ers podcast. Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, he is back to being QB1 for the 49ers. And I think something that, we were kind of tossing around before the episode was just this idea of like how many quarterbacks could be in the situation that Jimmy is and not, number one, make a fuss about it. Number two, be able to step right in and do what he did against Seattle. Granted, it's not a great Seahawks team, but he comes right off the bench, rips 5 passes, completes them all. He ends up, you know, having an all right game. I believe the quarterback rating was just a tick above 100. So he had a solid outing in his first game back, not expecting, of course, to start. But I mean, my first takeaway is like, my respect is through the roof for Jimmy Garoppolo. No matter how you feel about him as a quarterback, I feel like you have to, at minimum, respect the person being able to sort of put his pride aside for the betterment of the team and probably for the betterment of his career, considering he now has a chance to showcase himself coming off an injury and set himself up pretty nicely for free agency next offseason and forever whoever is going to be a suitor for him, because if he plays pretty well with the 49ers and gets them back to where they were last year, which was the conference championship, my guess is there are going to be a lot of teams lined up to try and get his services.
Yeah, and we talked last episode about how this whole offseason has happened and whether, Kyle Shanahan deserves credit for Jimmy Garoppolo still being on the roster. I think he does deserve some credit, but also you have to mostly credit the way that Jimmy Garoppolo has handled this thing. And I think you're right. Jimmy Garoppolo is perhaps the only quarterback in NFL history, at least the only quarterback in NFL history that has appeared and started a Super Bowl with the team that, this whole thing is happening for, and still be willing to return to this team. Now, maybe part of it, and I think a large part of it, is because of the lack of suitors that he had elsewhere. But reading the tea leaves and looking through all the reports as they come out now after the fact, it seems like there were quite a few teams that had interest in Jimmy Garoppolo. It looked like he was about to be a Washington Commander. Obviously, the Cleveland Browns were interested. A number of other teams, the Seattle Seahawks, I'm sure there were others as well. I mean, general manager John Lynch has said multiple times publicly he thought a deal was about to be done, and that was way back around the combine and before the draft. Um, so the fact that this didn't happen, that Jimmy Garoppolo is still a 49er and he handled it without a single word, a single bad word towards the 49ers, a single bad word towards Kyle Shanahan, didn't go up to John Lynch and demand his release. Like, I've done so much for this franchise. Just let me go. You owe me that at the very least. The fact that he didn't do that, I mean, you put the football player aside, Jimmy Garoppolo is clearly one of the most level-headed, uh, you know, emotionally intelligent quarterbacks I think that this league has ever seen. And, Kyle Shanahan was asked about this earlier this week. Like, what about Jimmy Garoppolo made him okay with all of this? Like, wouldn't he have some sort of desire to play elsewhere or to demand that he should still start here for the 49ers? And Shanahan was just like, "Yeah, well, that's just who Jimmy is. He's always been that way, and it's why we love him so much." I think as the years go on, and maybe this is his last year in San Francisco, I think that's certainly the most likely scenario. I think when he does leave, and no matter what the future holds, I think 49er fans will begin to respect and appreciate him more, not necessarily for what he does on the football field. That's, as we've talked about, is kind of a more up and down terrain, but just the person that he is, I think deserves a lot more respect than maybe he currently gets.
Yeah, and look, if he hadn't gotten the surgery when he did, he might be a Washington Commander right now, and that was reported by ESPN's Nick Wagner, kind of the whole timeline going on in the offseason. And as soon as they found out that he did get surgery, they went in another direction. Obviously, Carson Wentz is currently their quarterback in Washington. So the Niners, in a way, certainly lucked out. Jimmy, in a way, kind of lucked out by choosing to get that surgery later, because now I think he's probably in the best position for himself. If he was in Washington right now, looking at a subpar season, entering free agency, you're going up against a guy like Lamar Jackson is going to be a free agent in all likelihood. There's other quarterbacks on the market, so he might not be in a better position monetarily speaking to demand more money. So I do think there's something there for Jimmy as far as choosing to come back, but I do wonder how people feel about Jimmy G now, because there seemed to be a big split last year of, okay, you're either a Jimmy G person or not that you're a Kyle person, but it's just you believe that Jimmy is a limited quarterback, and the 49ers demand more credit than the actual guy under center for getting to a conference championship, a Super Bowl. But I do wonder if people are going to be rooting for Garoppolo more, not only just because they have to, because Trey Lance is no longer in the picture, and you obviously don't want to go to Brock Purdy as your third, now second string quarterback.
What about
But
Kurt Benkert?
Kurt Benkert, was signed to, I believe, the practice squad earlier this week. Former
Yeah.
Packers, former Falcons quarterback.
Virginia legend Kurt Benkert.
So they say, Mark. So they say. But I do wonder, because of how Jimmy G has conducted himself, if he's going to have more fans on his side this year, if he's going to have more people. Obviously, we saw the kind of jubilation that the offensive line, that the entire offense was featuring on Sunday in Seattle when Jimmy G took it into the end zone on his rushing touchdown. Like, there seems to be a lot more of that feeling now than there was last year. And I don't think it's just because fans are now forced to root for Garoppolo, essentially.
Yeah, I think people are realizing, 49er fans specifically realizing that with this injury to Trey Lance, if Jimmy Garoppolo didn't feel good enough about the organization, for whatever reason, didn't want to come back, that they would be playing, uh, Brock Purdy, or maybe if the situation was different, Nate Sudfeld, whoever it might have been. Sudfeld, of course, now one of the Lions' backup quarterbacks. But um, and at that point, if that was the case, then the season effectively is over. I mean, nothing against those guys, but you're just not competing with teams in this division, in this conference, with those guys than you would be with Jimmy Garoppolo. So
Yeah,
I think
it'd be
there's
another 2020, right?
yeah, of course. And you'd be, maybe there'd be Niner fans at that point rooting for more losses. You get another top pick that turns into a Nick Bosa like player, and that is what catapults you back up into Super Bowl relevancy. But with Jimmy Garoppolo here, that's not an option. Now the 49ers realize, and this is also something we touched on last episode, that perhaps now they have a better chance to win go deep in the playoffs and potentially compete for a Super Bowl this year. And that's thanks to Jimmy Garoppolo, his mindset, his willingness to come back, which really seemed unlikely. I mean, you mentioned that article on ESPN earlier this week by Nick Wagoner and Tim Kewen, and they wrote how Jimmy Garoppolo and his camp deciding to undergo surgery, quote, created some friction between Garoppolo and the team, with the source close to Garoppolo suggesting the team understandably saw surgery as a move that would reduce or even destroy the Niners' hopes of trading him before the draft. So there was a little bit of friction there, and you think just you know the optics of the Niners trading up to get a first round quarterback, third overall, and then you add in kind of the friction of the timing to decide to get surgery, and you think, all right, well, even if it's mutually beneficial, kind of the awkwardness between these two is not going to allow them to get a deal done. Yet it still got done. And it was clearly up to Jimmy Garoppolo, because Kyle Shanahan, based on this report that I just quoted from, Kyle Shanahan was more so like, why would Jimmy want to come back here? Like he took some it took some convincing from John Lynch of Kyle Shanahan, and then of course Jimmy Garoppolo saying like, yeah, if things don't work out, I'd be open to that. It was clearly like, if Jimmy says yes, then we'll do it. It was not the other way around. This was up to Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think it surprised Kyle Shanahan. It probably surprised John Lynch, and it surprised a lot of Niner fans that he was willing to do it. And as a result, the Niners, despite losing their starting quarterback, are still one of the favorites in the NFC.
Well, and they should be. I mean, we talked about preseason how the NFC was, clearly a weaker conference than the AFC. I think that still remains a fact, but it might be even worse than we than we thought. I mean, I'm looking at around the NFL, there's really only two teams that have separated themselves in my eyes, and that's Buffalo and Kansas City. I mean, in the NFC, it's San Francisco is right up there in my mind with LA, potentially even with Trey Lance at quarterback. They haven't necessarily looked great out of the gates as the defending Super Bowl champs. Tampa Bay has probably been the most impressive to me thus far. You could obviously throw Green Bay in there. Philadelphia has looked really good, 2-0 starting this season, but the door is wide open for the Niners, and that is why maybe there's more of kind of a rallying cry behind Jimmy Garoppolo, is because the window is absolutely open. I mean, whether or not they can beat whoever comes out of the AFC is a question mark, but once you get to the game, throw the record books out. So they just need to find a way, and we talked about this in the last episode, to get into the dance, and I think we both feel better about their chances now than prior. But this is absolutely a big game coming up this weekend on Sunday night for Jimmy Garoppolo, for the San Francisco 49ers, because you're looking at a Denver team that a lot of people were high on. They haven't necessarily looked great, but they are 1-1 to start the season, just like San Francisco, who also technically has not looked that great through their first two games. So this is an important matchup, and one that I don't necessarily know if you can project the rest of the season off of, but beginning the season 2-1 compared to last year when, this was around the time, I know they won their first two games, but then they started to slide a bit under Jimmy Garoppolo, of course, ending 3-5 at the 8-week mark before they began to turn things around. And so this to me is a very important game, Mark, and one that I am looking at to see how the Niners face adversity and how they face a familiar foe in a guy named Russell Wilson.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the Russell Wilson story is interesting, because the Niners, you think that uh, once he's traded from Seattle, you're going to avoid him, you're not going to have to play him anymore, and then lo and behold, week 3, you're taking on Russell Wilson as well. But again, I think, like we mentioned at the top, I mean, Kyle Shanahan now has Jimmy Garoppolo back at the helm. He has a whole week to plan for him. So, I mean, the Niners have played teams at this, Bronco level, uh, in the past with Jimmy Garoppolo, and it'll likely be a really competitive game. I know we'll dive into it more in a little bit and probably give out some score predictions, maybe picks against the spread. But I mean, I'm imagining this is going to be similar to games in the past, like Niners Rams, where it's competitive and it comes down towards the end. Because despite the fact that the Broncos have struggled this year and they do not look good, I mean, this is still a really competitive and a really talented team.
No doubt. This is the 415ers podcast 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, in the Odyssey Podcast Network in cooperation with 95.7 The Game. Evan Giddings, Marc Grandy. You can follow us on Twitter. I am at egiddings10. Marc is at Marc Grandy. Marc with a C, Grandy with an I. Make sure to download, rate, and subscribe to the podcast. 3 episodes a week, a lot of 49ers content coming your way. And as we sort of shift focus to the game itself on Sunday night, there's a couple of things I'm looking at, but the biggest thing for me, and knock on wood, of course, but it appears that George Kittle will be making his return to the starting lineup for the San Francisco 49ers. And that is someone that, as much as Jimmy Garoppolo, I think people associate with the 49ers, entering this season, we're talking about who's going to be the face of San Francisco, who's going to be the face of 49ers football. To me, the first guy that popped into my mind was George Kittle. And he hasn't been on the field for the first 2 games. So not only do you get the production of a top 2, 3 tight end, however you want to slot him, you're also getting one of your leaders out there on the field that absolutely impacts the game in a positive way.
Yeah, of course. You're absolutely right. I mean, George Kittle, uh, the common line is he's the best blocking tight end in the NFL, perhaps one of the best blocking tight ends the NFL has ever seen, but he's also one of the best pass catchers from that tight end position. So he's really the best of both worlds. And for a team that is as in love with the run game as the 49ers are, Kittle is absolutely vital. I mean, oftentimes he's like a sixth offensive lineman out there. And I mean, I thought something that Kyle Juszczyk said earlier this week on an appearance with Damon and Rado on 95.7 The Game was how a lot of teams are kind of copying what the Niners do in certain portions of the run game. There's a play where Kyle Juszczyk moves kind of in a jet sweep motion pre-snap and with the snap, and then he comes off to the left or right side of the offensive line and double teams the edge with George Kittle, and that opens up a lot. And there's just not a lot of teams that can do that, where you have a fullback and a tight end that are as good at blocking specifically for the run as George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk are. And you try to replace that with a Ross Dwelly or a Tyler Kroft, who's new to the team this year. Tyler Kroft now, unfortunately, is going to be out for a few weeks, it seems like. But no matter who it is, you're not going to be able to replace George Kittle either in the passing game or in the run game. And I think it's a real shame that we didn't get to see Trey Lance with George Kittle this year, because I think Lance would have looked a whole lot better. He would have been a lot more comfortable, probably would have helped out the run game and therefore given Lance more opportunities to throw the ball down the field. But there is no doubt, no matter who is at quarterback, George Kittle is your best friend because of what he does in both the run and pass game. And if he's back, uh, that gives the 49ers a much better shot at winning this ball game, because despite the fact that he might not, give you the 100 yards receiving every week that maybe a Travis Kelce does, a Mark Andrews does, Darren Waller does, he has just as big of an impact, if not more, on every single game than any tight end in the league.
Yeah, no, and speaking of Travis Kelce, I know that he even admitted himself that the way that they use Kittle in San Francisco
Yeah.
is one of the reasons why he's maybe not seen as the clear-cut best tight end in the league. And of course, people are telling Kittle, well, if you want to be Travis Kelce, just quit blocking. But
Yeah,
you
it
have
was
to
his podcast.
utilize what you're good at.
It was his podcast with his brother, Jason Kelce and Travis Kelce. And I think it was actually Jason Kelce that said, "Hey, George, just don't be such a great blocker, and then you can catch more balls." Like, it's pretty simple.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Shannon Sharp also said that at one point in his career. He's like, yeah, I don't get paid to block. But George Kittle does. That
He
is a
does,
fact.
and
George
he
Kittle
loves it.
he's paid a lot of money to block, and he will be doing it hopefully all Sunday night long. The game will be 5:20. It's going to be in Denver Pacific time, and I can't wait for it. Some other injury updates. Eric Armstead was a non-participant earlier this week. George Kittle was a limited participant in practice, and Daniel Brunskill also questionable. But one thing as far as injuries are concerned, and I'm interested to get your take on this, Mark, the running back situation for the 49ers. Now, they've had somewhat of a revolving door, running back by committee strategy in the past, looking as early as last year. Elijah Mitchell is, kind of turned into their bell cow guy, but he was a sixth round pick last season. He usurped Trey Sermon, who's no longer on the team. This year, Ty Davis Price, the third round pick, goes down. He's going to be out multiple weeks now with a high ankle sprain, according to Kyle Shanahan. So it's pretty much in the backfield going to be, I mean, you're looking at JJ was, you're looking at Marlon Mack, who they just signed. You're looking at a couple of guys that have not been asked up until this point to be 15, potentially 20 carry running backs. And if they're going to run the ball 45 times like they did against Seattle, it's going to be a lot of work for three running backs who are not particularly accustomed to getting that type of workload.
Yeah, obviously, you'd prefer to have your entire backfield healthy, but I am not at all worried about the 49ers run game. Obviously, Elijah Mitchell has proven to be a quality back in the NFL. The only question about him is his health, and unfortunately, he's out right now. Ty Davis Price, I thought looked really good in his first NFL action last week. Just unfortunate that he goes down with an injury.
Jeff
But
Wilson,
Jeff
pardon
Wilson,
me.
yeah, Jeff Wilson Jr., obviously, I mean, he got, the lion's share of the carries last week, 18 carries, 84 yards, almost 5 yards a pop. I think he's good for generally probably, 15 rushes a game at least moving forward, unless something changes. We'll probably see some Jordan Mason, who's the undrafted rookie running back. He'll probably fill in that Ty Davis Price role from last week. Probably not going to get up into double digit carries, would be my guess. I think where things change is we'll see more Deebo Samuel. And Kyle Shanahan was a little bit elusive when asked about this week. He said he was asked, well, with the injuries to the running back spot, now the injury to Trey Lance, do you expect to feature Deebo Samuel a bit more? Is he going to get more touches? And Shanahan said, well, we've already involved him a lot in the offense so far this year, but I think, the writing on the wall is he can be involved more. His usage hasn't quite been what it was like last year. And so I think we're going to see Deebo Samuel in the run game more. He had 4 carries last week against Seattle, 53 rushing yards. Well, of course, 51 of them came on one play alone. But I would expect his carries to probably be up closer to 8 in this game. Evan, I'm not sure how you feel, but with Deebo Samuel getting that many touches, he's liable to break one for 50 yards every single time he touches the ball. But with the combination of him, Jeff Wilson Jr., maybe you see Marlon Mack, but you can sprinkle in some Jordan Mason here and there. I think the 49ers run game will be fine. If there's anything that Kyle Shanahan can claim that he has done year after year, it is produce really, really good running attacks, no matter who his running back is. I mean, you think about the fantasy football world, the toughest question is who in the 49ers backfield do you want on your team? Because he can make anyone a star. And at this point, we're just kind of waiting if anyone else is going to step into the spotlight because there's some open spots because of the injuries.
Well, I think right now your pick would absolutely be Jeff Wilson Jr. He's probably going to get the bulk of the carries, and it could be someone, at least that I would look at featuring out of the backfield. I do think Deebo will get the ball more on the ground, but I'm also looking at a Broncos secondary that, at least coming into this year, I thought was going to be pretty good, but they've looked, relatively shaky in their first 2 opponents of the season. Obviously, they lost to Seattle in, weirdly spectacular fashion. They were down at the half to Houston at home. Russell Wilson has looked not unlimited. He has looked very limited in his first 2 games as his quarterback for the Broncos. And so, although I don't necessarily see a huge issue with the running backs for the 49ers. I do wonder how they're going to stack up against the Denver pass rush. I don't know about you, but I feel like that to me is probably where the biggest matchup is for me in this game, just because the 49ers offensive line, even though I think that was a large question for a lot of people entering the season, we haven't really heard much about them at all because they've played pretty well. Climate conditions against Chicago. Last week, they were very good. Even with some inexperience in the middle, they've done a formidable job so far. But I'm looking at the Broncos pass rushers, Bradley Chubb, Randy Gregory, both on the outside, although Gregory is questionable. Like, those are going to be two guys that you are absolutely going to have to keep out of the backfield with Jimmy Garoppolo. And one of the reasons that, of course, Trey Lance was hoped to be a different featured quarterback was because he could move in the pocket. He could evade pass rush, whereas Jimmy G is more of a standing target. And so I'm curious what your biggest matchup is of this game, because to me, I'm looking at the pass rush for Denver against the San Francisco offensive line.
I think that's a good one. I will say I think I am higher on the 49er offensive line than most people are. There's reason to be a little skeptical. Who have they really played to this point? I will say I think that Chicago has a good defensive line, and the Seahawks probably a little underrated in their front, just because you're not really quite sure who they are just yet, but they do have a good amount of talent there. But still, they haven't played, people like, as you mentioned, Bradley Chubb and Randy Gregory and DJ Jones, former Niner, who's now going to play, nose right in the middle of the defense for the Broncos, although he also is questionable to play in this game this week. This is probably the best front the Niners have played against so far this year, but I will say that I think the Niners offensive line has already answered a lot of questions. I mean, you look at their young guys that have been starting. Aaron Banks, who was a high pick in last year's draft, didn't play at all last year. He's looked really good, especially this last week against Seattle. Had his best game as a pro by far. Of course, the relatively small sample size, but still, he
Former
was really
graduate of
good.
El Cerrito High School. Just want to fit that
Oh,
in there.
shout out, shout out. Also, Spencer Burford, the rookie, he's been really good, and they're earning praise. Getting high PFF grades all over the place. So I think this is an offensive line that is up to the challenge. I'll flip to the other side and think it's the 49ers front against the Broncos offensive line, because what's been the story in the past when the Niners play Russell Wilson, it's, can you get to Russell Wilson quick enough before he is able to break down the defense and make a play down the field? The defensive front is obviously the strength of this team for the 49ers, but if you want to be effective against Russell Wilson, you need to make him uncomfortable. You need to avoid his scrambles that turn into 50-yard gains down the field. This is a talented receiving core for Denver. They have the ability to separate from your defensive backs. I know that the Niners, have been good there in the secondary, but so far you've played against Justin Fields and Geno Smith. No comparison to Russell Wilson, even if he has taken a bit of a step back in his career to this point. I think the Niners defensive front, they have to be on their game in this one. They have to track down Russell Wilson. They have to make him uncomfortable. They have to get him for losses a few times and make him pay for trying to use those legs of his. I think that's my key matchup in this one, and I think that probably favors the Niners because their defensive front seven is probably as good as any in the NFL.
Well, and I guess that's why I didn't necessarily look at that as the key to this game, because to be quite honest, I'm not really worried about the 49ers defensive line. I don't think they'll have an issue getting to Russell Wilson despite his past success against them. I mean, Russ in a lot of ways, and I want to remind everyone that this is the 415ers podcast that you can catch on the Odyssey Podcast Network in cooperation with 95.7 The Game. Make sure to download, rate, and subscribe to each episode. Evan Giddings and Marc Grandy with you as always. The 49ers defensive line against the Broncos O-line, to me, I mean, it should be a win. I mean, if the 49ers cannot get consistent pressure on Russell Wilson, I think that's going to be a problem, but I'm not necessarily worried about it because the Broncos O-line so far hasn't been able, at least from what I've seen, been able to stand up to either Seattle or Houston. two groups up front that I would consider, and I think you would too, far less talented and effective than the 49ers. So I think they'll be able to win that. My question, and on the outside, I mean, Jerry Judy's questionable for this week. Russell Wilson, if you take a look at the totality of his career against the 49ers, has compiled like an MVP season against the 49ers. He's
Yeah.
16-4. I mean, he's got a 100 quarterback rating. I believe like 36 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. I mean, he has killed the 49ers in his career with Seattle. This is not the same Russell Wilson of yesteryear, of a decade ago. This to me looks like a guy that is over the hill on the wrong side of 30, and with an offensive line that is just as bad, if not maybe worse, than the one he played in front of last year in Seattle. Yes, he can extend plays. Yes, he can turn a 4-yard loss or a sack into potentially a 50-yard bomb. But if he's not doing that against the Seahawks and the Texans, look, maybe there's going to be some familiarity for him against the 49ers, and he'll recognize things a little bit quicker. Obviously, he's in a new system under a new head coach, new coaching staff there in Denver. There's a lot to pick up on in a new situation. But I want to make Russ beat me in this game. And I think the 49ers are up for it because, look, he hasn't demonstrated so far that he can do it. And even going back to last year, like there was a cliff that he kind of fell off of from 2 years ago to last. In my opinion, Russell Wilson is going to be the guy. Like I'm okay with him throwing the ball 25, 30 times. I don't know about you.
Are you sure about that? I mean, you're playing a dangerous game. Russell Wilson in his career, you look at the numbers since the Seahawks drafted Russell Wilson, the start of the 2012 season, Seattle is 17-4 against San Francisco. And I know your point that was, younger Russ Wilson, not this guy, and now he's in Denver. He's been through some injuries. He's clearly not the mobile guy that he used to be. He never was a big runner, but always used his legs to extend plays and make plays down the field. He's not quite as good at that, but I would not put it past Russ to have, a classic Russ game against the San Francisco 49ers. I know that it's been ugly so far for Denver in these two games. Absolutely. I know it. They're going through some growing pains right now. Their new quarterback, Nathaniel Hackett, is under fire already. I would just tell everyone it's early. Teams do not look like their full selves after 2 weeks of an NFL season. This Broncos team will get better, and it could happen this week. Now, I'm not saying I expect the Niners to lose. We'll give out score predictions later. But all I'm saying is Russell Wilson knows how to beat Kyle Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers. He is going to be up for this game. He wants to beat San Francisco. And I don't know. I think it's too early, in my opinion, to write off Russell Wilson. And I think Niner fans should be the last people to do that uh, because of what he's proven in the past. I am as scared as ever to go against Russell Wilson just because of what the history says. So I disagree with you there. I do not want Russell Wilson. I do not want the game in his hands. If it is, I think he'll find a way to pull out another miracle and win this game. Russell Wilson, the Niners need to make him as uncomfortable as possible. They need to sack him a few times. They need to get him shaken up to win this game. Because otherwise, Russell Wilson might pull out some classic Russell Wilson magic. We've just seen it too many times, specifically against the 49ers.
We have, but we have not seen it in a Broncos uniform. And again,
True.
my argument is that this is not Russ of even 2020. This is not Russ of 2016. This is not the MVP version or offensive player of the year version, however you want to put it, of Russell Wilson. This is a guy that through his first 2 games is completing less than 60% of his passes. This is a guy that has needed every single throw to beat the Houston Texans at home. Now, I do see the argument of, okay, teams are inevitably going to get better. And with Denver being a team that was, kind of constructed loosely You bring in Russ, you bring in a new head coach, you have a new coaching staff. There's a lot that they're still figuring out that I'm sure they'll get better at. But I think the 49ers are catching them at a good time in the season because to me, if that is going to happen for Denver and they're going to get it together, it's not going to be in week 3. And to me, again, the 49ers will create pressure on Russell Wilson. They will get to the quarterback. Now, can they get him to the ground is going to be the question. But to me, I've also seen in the last couple of years, Russ sometimes will break the pocket when he doesn't need to. Like he makes plays more difficult than they have to be. And I think a product of that is he was so good early in his career at not turning over the football and turning those nothing plays into amazing, deep down the field, game breaking type plays. But I'm just looking at a 34-year-old now that's moved into the most expensive home in Denver and is very comfortable with his faith, family, and football, whatever he's putting on his TikTok, and he's more worried about all of his cliches and post-game interviews and the prom dresses or prom suits that he's wearing to the football game. Like there's so many different things about Russell Wilson now than when he played in Seattle that I want him to prove it. And I know that's a dangerous thing to say when you've had, like you mentioned, you listed the 17 wins to 14 losses or 4 losses that he's had against the San Francisco 49ers. But to me, I want to make him prove it that he is still that guy. And in a lot of ways, the 49ers are still trying to prove that they are that team under now Jimmy Garoppolo. So it's two teams that are familiar with each other, or two, I should say, quarterbacks that are familiar with each other. And I guess I just trust the one that is in the red and gold.
Oh man, you quote from Evan Giddings, I want Russ to prove it. Be careful what you wish for, okay? I mean, this is one of the better quarterbacks of this generation.
Yeah.
I understand
2014, he's
everything.
pretty good.
I understand everything that you're saying. He's on the wrong side of 30. Things do not look good right now. All I will say is do not write him off. Do not write this Broncos team off earlier, or right now, because I think it's too early. New head coach, Nathaniel Hackett. I know he's made some bad decisions. I don't know what he was thinking week 1 when he decided to wait for the play clock to run out, call a timeout, and attempt a 64-yard field goal, whatever it was, which would have been an NFL record. I
actually had the distance, but
I do not understand that play call. You know, you just signed Russell Wilson to a gigantic contract. Let him try to get you 10 yards on a 4th and 5, and then you make a much easier field goal, and you come out of that game with a win. Things will get better for Denver. I can absolutely guarantee you that. Whether or not Russell Wilson goes back to, 2014, 15, 16 Russell Wilson, that's a different question. He will not get back to that level, but he still has good football in him. Nathaniel Hackett, coming off of a win, is going to get more comfortable. This is a guy that is really respected around the league. I mean, Kyle Shanahan was asked about him earlier this week and said, well, I coached with his dad in Tampa Bay. His dad is, one of, my father figures in this league in terms of who I've learned a lot from. And Shanahan even admitted we came close to hiring Nathaniel Hackett to come on the staff in San Francisco multiple times. So this is a guy that San Francisco and the 49ers and Shanahan and Lynch have a lot of respect for. There's a reason that he got this head coaching gig. It has been bad early. No one is denying that. But a first-year head coach going through a bit of growing pains, he's going to get better. A win will calm him down. They got that against the Texans despite the fact that it did look ugly. And this is a Broncos team that has too much talent to look this bad all year long. And I know it's only week 3. I agree with you. I'd rather play, if I'm the San Francisco 49ers, I'd rather play Denver now than, say, in week 9. Because I'm sure, barring injury, that Denver will be better in week 9 than they are right now. But still, this is a team with a lot of talent, with a quarterback that has, been in your nightmares for the last decade. And the words out of your mouth are, Russ, go ahead and prove it to us one more time. How many more times does he have to prove it, Evan? Because he's proven it countless times already.
All right, well, let's get right to it then. Our predictions for the Sunday night football game: San Francisco 49ers go to Mile High. They're taking on the Denver Broncos. And I'm gonna roll with the Niners, Mark. And the reason being, Russ the entire mantra of last season, of the last few seasons in Seattle, is let Russ cook. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Russ is cooked. All right. Russ
Wow.
is cooked. And the reason being, he is completing less than 60% of his passes. His quarterback rating is under 90. And he's been playing the Seattle Seahawks and the Houston Texans. He's going to be playing a far better, a far superior 49ers team. They're going to be in the backfield all night long. They're going to run it down the Denver Broncos' throat. 40-plus carries for the 49ers. Jimmy Garoppolo is going to do what he does. And I think the 49ers, they don't cruise, but I think they find a way to comfortably win this game. I'm going to go 28-20. San Francisco 49ers beat the Broncos, and they moved on to 2-1.
28-20, huh? So Niners cover and the over hits, huh?
Yes, sir.
So right
I
now
saw 45 as the total, but you said it was 44.5?
it's somewhere around there. We can call it 45. Niners also, I think, -1.5 last time I saw. So they cover comfortably for Evan there, and the over hits as well. I'm with you in terms of the victor in this game. I'll also go San Francisco. Just exercising caution with Russell Wilson. I think this game will be right there for him at the end. But as you mentioned, this Niner defense is much better than the ones he's faced so far this year with the Seahawks and the Texans. I also think the Niners cover, but it's going to be a nail biter if you're on this game. San Francisco 23, Denver 20. And I think the under hits in Denver. I think these are two teams that are going to be trading field goals for a lot of this one, a couple of touchdowns. Maybe Deebo Samuel breaks a big one, but 23-20 San Francisco is the final score for me. I think it's kind of a classic Jimmy Garoppolo game. He has a couple of bad mistakes, maybe throws one interception, but other than that is largely efficient, completes upwards of 65% of his passes. Lots of short routes, crosses to Deebo, some wide receiver screens outside to Deebo quickly, get him up to perhaps close to 15 touches in this game. And I think he'll be the leading force offensively. And then I think Nick Bosa has a couple of sacks. You see the San Francisco defense really step up, bend, don't break, hold the Broncos to a couple of field goals, and you ultimately win the game by a field goal, 23-20.
Okay, 23-20 for Mark. I'm saying 28-20. I also think George Kittle is going to score a touchdown. If he does play on Sunday night, I do think you can pencil in whatever prop bettors are out there. I don't know what the odds are. Throw it on George Kittle. He's getting into the end zone.
Okay, I like it. I mean, get on it as soon as you can, because the closer we get to game day, I imagine that number is going to come down because, reading the tea leaves now, it seems like he's going to play. We'll of course see when Sunday does come. But yeah, I like that pick. That's an interesting one. I'm not a big prop guy, but maybe I should dig into it a bit more.
Well, we shall see. We could be right, could be wrong. Come Monday morning, we'll be talking to you right here on the 415ers podcast. For Marc Grandy, my name is Evan Giddings. We'll be talking to you again, coming to you on Monday with a reaction to the Sunday night football game. Hopefully, the San Francisco 49ers can get the job done in Denver against the Broncos. But in the meantime, make sure to download, subscribe, and rate the podcast, the 415ers, wherever you get your podcasts. Also on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network, the Odyssey app, in cooperation with 95.7 The Game, as always. Marc, I appreciate you. Talk to you next time, man.
Sounds good. Talk to you on Monday.
All right. See you, everyone.